The idea of PISA is to not only look at whether students can reproduce what they have learned in school, but to see whether they can extrapolate from this, whether they can apply their knowledge in novel situations. And you can see that some education systems do a really good job in sort of preparing young people for a world that we do not know yet. And that's very, very strong in some education systems, some systems in East Asia, Finland in Europe, Canada and North America, very, very strong on this. Other systems are more traditional in their outlook, and they focus very much on sort of content knowledge, and PISA exposes those differences. PISA exposes not just the overall performance of systems, but the relative strengths and weaknesses of systems in fostering student competencies for the world of tomorrow. Students have different talents, they have different motivations, they come from different social backgrounds. And we can see that this is probably the single biggest challenge for most education systems, to foster the talents of all students, irrespective of their social background. What is so encouraging is that some systems succeed so much better with this than others. You can see that, for example, in a country like Finland, social background has only a very modest impact on learning outcomes. Or in Japan, you can see that even if you come from a poor family, the system is able to mobilize your talent. What is interesting is that some systems have really been able to improve those outcomes. Now, often we think of equity as something that is entrenched in society, but you can think of Portugal in Europe or Germany in Europe. Countries that have remarkably been successful in reducing social inequalities, and that tells you that those things are actually amenable to change. You can take a look at Germany, for example. When the results in 2000 came out, people were very disappointed by the large impact that social background had on the success of young people. 2009, the results were a lot better because policymakers have been working on this, providing better support for students with an immigrant background, strengthening early childhood education, lots of things happening. Immigration, another big factor. We often see diversity as the problem for the knowledge society, but indeed it's the potential. If you look to Europe, many European countries really struggle with that problem. But I think we can look at the examples of systems that actually do well. Students with an immigrant background in Sweden, for example, still succeed quite well, or in Canada. Canada, of course, has a quite selective immigration policy, but at the same time, students from all backgrounds do well. We attribute great importance to the engagement of students in the learning process because, in school, someone is going to teach you, but when you're on your own in life, your success depends on your capacity and motivation to every day expand your own horizons. In some countries, effective outcomes go together with effective learning strategies. In other countries, students do quite well on a test, but they don't have either the motivation, the engagement, the dispositions to learning that you really need to succeed in today's economies. There are important successes. You look at a country like Japan, where students always did well on tests, but where students, boys and girls, generally did not show very strong levels of interest, engagement, enjoyment of learning. And Japan put a lot of emphasis on those kinds of issues in its reforms, and it did succeed. There was no other country in the world that has seen as much improvement in student-teacher relations, in student enjoyment and engagement with learning. So it really shows that where you make an effort, you can actually achieve results. Those systems set, first of all, very high expectations on what students should be able to do. They don't tell teachers what to teach. They expect that from the profession, but they're very clear about what good performance is, what competency is like. And at the same time, they provide very, very strong support for students, for teachers. The second dimension is there's a lot of professional responsibility at the point of delivery in schools, in instructional environments. Teachers have a lot of responsibility, but they also have a lot of professional autonomy within a collaborative culture. They are embedded in a collaborative culture where they connect with other teachers, where they connect with other schools. You know, you go to Singapore, every year teachers have 100 hours of professional development. And this is not in isolation, you know, I learn for myself, but I go back to the National Institute of Education where I share my expertise with others and try to advance my field of knowledge. At the same time, the counterpart to this is the system is able to intervene inverse in proportion to success. The system is actually able to zoom in where support is important and needed. Shanghai is not the kind of rich city that we see on pictures. It does have a large variability in its population. You know, you have 5 million immigrant workers coming from very poor backgrounds. And the success of Shanghai has really been to connect the experience of teachers. Now, if you are a vice principal in a high-performing school in Shanghai and you do want to become a principal, then you don't become it just by waiting and continue to do what you currently do, but you need to connect with a school that is really in trouble, and you need to show and demonstrate that you can actually change that school, improve that school. The third dimension, very important as well, is the capacity of systems to understand and engage with diversity. So good teachers know that students learn differently, and they're actually able to sort of embrace that diversity with differentiated pedagogical strategies. So one teacher, even in a large classroom, Japan is a great example. Classes are very large, but teachers are still able to engage with the individual approaches to learning differently. What's very interesting is that we have seen real change happening since the year 2000. Some countries have seen significant rises in the quality of learning outcomes. Now, if you think, for example, Poland was able to remarkably improve its performance, reduce disparities between schools. Korea was able to raise the performance of its top-performing students further. Korea was very interested in excellence and was able to actually achieve much higher levels of students performing really well. At the other end of the spectrum, you could see a country like Brazil, traditionally one of the lowest performing education systems. But the progress achieved in Brazil has been remarkable. They've got more children into school and at the same time been able to raise quality and outcomes. Chile in South America, another of those countries. There are other areas where it's very hard to discern outcomes. You look at, we all hope that one day technology is going to make a big impact on the way in which students learn and what students learn. That is not yet coming clearly through our data. And there have been basically two dimensions along which we have tried to innovate, to develop PISA. The first and perhaps most important relates to the kind of competencies that we assess. Currently, it is still limited. There are still very important competencies that we know matter a lot for the success of people that are very hard to capture and measure. And PISA is investing a lot of effort in doing this better. For example, in the year 2000, we focused the assessment on reading, math, and science, things that we know how to assess and that we know are important for people's life. Measuring metacognition has been something that we have done for the first time in 2009. You know, not only what I know, but how do I approach fields of knowledge? Now, for 2015, we have the ambition, for example, to assess not only problem solving, that has always been an important part of PISA, but collaborative problem solving. You know, to what extent can people share their knowledge, jointly use knowledge? Because innovation today is no longer I invent something for the world, but I work with other people. The other track is understanding success. And there actually PISA has made a lot of progress. When we started in 2000, we could only account for about 30% of the performance variation among schools in the world. If you look at PISA 2009, we're able to account for 85% of the performance variability among schools. We have a much clearer picture of what are the policies and practices and contextual factors that are associated with success. The future of PISA is about much more linking what we see to instructional policies and practice, to the use of technology, creating closer linkages between the outcomes that we observe and the kind of learning processes that lead to them. So on the one hand, broadening the range of competencies through which we measure success, and on the other hand, explaining those outcomes so that we can develop ways to improve education.